Well, last week we got into the subject of Sabbath, which requires more than half a sermon. So, I mean, we could spend weeks and weeks really on that subject, which we won't do, but we are giving it some more time here today. So, I'm going to recap a little bit from last week. So, we looked at how people generally have a hard time stopping. And the reasons for that can vary from person to person, but we just don't like to stop. And when we are forced to stop, oh my, that can be really stressful. More stressful, maybe, than all the work that we're doing. It's just because we're just so used to being busy, busy, busy. Go, go, go. We like to do that. And on one side of the coin, I mean, we are made to do things. God made us to be busy, to be creative. And so it's not a bad thing. It just becomes bad when we cannot stop or we simply will not stop. Last week we also considered chaos, the idea of chaos. And life sometimes is just really, really stressful. Now, some stress can be good. We need to have some of that in life, but there are times when, yeah, it's just too much, and that's not good. And some stress, that's just beyond our control. That's the way life is. Yet, though, our culture's go, go, go mentality and our own contributions to that, that we got in our own hearts, it really feeds into the chaos that we have in our lives at times. And so we also then looked at how at the end of creation, God stopped. God stopped and just sat back and enjoyed all that had created. And that is part of what Sabbath is really all about. It's about taking time to sit back and soak in the blessings that we have in life and simply enjoy them. So a question I'll ask, I asked it last week, I'll ask it again now. Have you, or how well are we at just setting back and enjoying all of the blessings that we have and just soaking it in? I hope that you this past week took some time to do that. I won't ask you at this point to raise your hands as to whether you did or not. Although I will say in our discussion afterwards, it is a question. So we will get into it then. But if you didn't do that, I hope that you will begin doing that here in this coming week. So I will encourage it. And really, in that, I'm implying that Sabbath is something that you can sprinkle out through the week too. I mean, that's a mindset that we really should have. And like most things in life, it does take practice to do that. For example, you don't just pick up an instrument and play it. At least most people do. There's probably some people that can do that. Also with a sport, you don't just go and do it well. Most people, you have to practice at those things. And I would guess that most of us here have probably fought with people, fought with kids over, practicing. You got to practice your instrument. You got to go to practice, and then they'll complain. It's like, well, I don't want to practice. I don't like doing that. And if they fought you on it, they probably at some point paid a price for having not practiced. And so, if you're going to be good at something, you just have to work at it. And Sabbath. And really, most of the things of God are the same way. They're not just going to happen in your life because, I know I should do that. No, you have to practice it to get good at it. And so with Sabbath, if you're going to practice that, maybe it's going to feel clunky if you're not used to it. You may feel like I could spend my time better doing other things. But when we actually practice it, we find that, this really works. We find that we can appreciate and thank God and really soak in the blessings that He gives to us. And when we do that, when we actually practice it, we find that we experience God's power coming into our lives and putting the chaos at bay. And so today, that's kind of recap mostly there from last week. But for this morning now, we're going to take some more time to look at Sabbath. And our key idea for Sabbath this morning is that Sabbath is an act of trust. It is trust that everything, that idea is where this message is leading here this morning. So Sabbath is an act of trust that God is the source of all of our provision. God is going to provide all that we need. So think about provision here. Getting our provision, what is needed in life, what is wanted in life. That is probably about 90% of what you do. That's behind most of what you do in life. Everything from working a job to provide, paying that mortgage, to packing lunches. That's all about providing provision. Helping kids to thrive, getting them to practice, helping them with school, helping them get into college or a trade school or into a job that is good for them, helping to set up a home or apartment for them. All of that is providing provision in life and living life. Man, that requires a lot of provision. Our youngest daughter, Lydia, is still, she's the last one that we've got in college, and that's a lot of provision there. And she's dealing in life with provision. And so she spent this last summer working 3 different part-time jobs. She was very busy, and she was saving money, which is good. But that does not prevent her from saying, "Hey, Dad, I need," she was home a little bit on Friday, and she said, "Dad, my car needs an oil change." Like, well, okay, well, let's go get that taken care of. And we were coming back. She's like, "Dad, my car's about out of gas." Like, okay, well, we'll take care of that, And so it's like all this provision. It's kind of an expensive trip, of her coming down. She's also, and she's really thinking. She's got a savings account, and so she's putting money back into that. Now, maybe you can imagine this, but you're doing this yourself. But our bank accounts, you can do them all online, and so you can see online what's in there, and I can see her account, because he's got her checking account, and I can keep track, and I watch, and I can move money back and forth, and she doesn't have the power to do that. The savings account I mentioned, she set up her own savings account, where I don't have the power to get into it. And I'm like, okay. Because she's wanting to provide provision for certain things, and I'm like, okay, now wait a minute. If you want me to pay for that, So anyway, that's just kind of part of our adventure with providing provision. But provision here, a lot of what we do in life is about getting provision, not just for ourselves, but for our loved ones. And it's the things that we need and the things that we want. And no, it's not bad, to want some things. But this drive that we have for provision, it really sets itself against this idea of Sabbath. It sets itself against that. And so God had to deal with Israel on this subject. So let's look at what God says about Sabbath here. And earlier you heard God's calling the 10 Commandments to remember the Sabbath. And it says, remember, this is part of it, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor. So God's not against work, okay? 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not work. Now at that point, God has just led these people out of slavery in Egypt. And if you ever wonder how it was the people ended up as slaves in Egypt, you got to look at the end of the book of Genesis. and Joshua's story. I mean, I could unpack a lot out of that, but very quickly, remember or Joseph, he was Jacob's favored son. He was a son who had the coat of many colors, and he was sold into slavery in Egypt. But while he was in Egypt, he rose to power, a very high position, kind of like Daniel in Babylon. And so he rose to power. He was eventually restored to his family, and his family ended up moving down to Egypt because of a great famine. And it was after then Joseph's time that the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. So when we get to the book of Exodus, for many, many, many generations, the people were born into slavery. And these people, they never got a day off. They had back-breaking work from sun up to sundown. They lived their lives doing this until the day they died. I mean, these people no doubt died working. You die on the job, drag them out, plug in the next slave. That's how it was. That's how they spent their lives building the dreams of other people. Never did any of the provision that they created go to their own families or their own dreams. And so we get then to after the Exodus, God's giving them the Ten Commandments. How do you think they might have reacted to having a day off? How might that sound? You might think they would say, yeah, buddy, about time. I get to have a day off. And no doubt there were probably some people that would think that. But now let's think of another idea, though. How strong do you think the idea or the temptation could have been to just simply keep working? Think about that. I mean, that's all they ever known, right? Just work, work, work. And so they just would have been easy, just keep right on working. Secondly, these people can now work for their own dreams. I mean, the provisions that they create are for their dreams, their families, not Pharaoh's families, not Pharaoh's dreams, not the Egyptian people, my own. And arguably, that idea or that draw to just keep working for that sake of my family, my dreams, was maybe a stronger pull than, hooray, a day off. And so, I mean, that's probably going on in the minds of these people. So then let's ask the question, why? Why does God stress observing Sabbath upon these people? Why does God stress this? Well, the easy answer is that we just forget. Okay, we forget about God. I mean, that's just kind of how we are. We forget things in general. And how much time could I spend talking about how I forget things? But we just get busy with so many things in life, and we forget important things like God. I mean, we heard in that Deuteronomy passage earlier, God saying, do not forget the Lord your God. I'll repeat part of it, and it says, when you have eaten and are satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands like Sabbath. That's what he's getting at. And how easy is it for us to forget about God when life is good? When life is good, we just got to keep going. We forget about God. But the deeper reason, I think, that God stresses Sabbath upon these people is that without a stop sign, without a timeout, we will just keep right on working, gathering more and more provision for our dreams, for our goals. And then what happens? Then our sense of value, our sense of purpose, our sense of meaning, that feeling of completeness and wholeness that we have in life is found in all of those other things and not in God. And all those other things like, work, the expectations that the world puts upon us, our own expectations that we put on ourselves, those things can be terrible slave masters. And we end up working under the whip of those things until the day we die, okay? And I think, little sidebar here, I think one of the reasons that we have a hard time stopping is that we don't have a sense of completeness. Completeness is something that we see in the creation. I'm going to reread. We'll go back to that creation story that we looked at last week, and it says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed." There's that word. They were completed. And all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. And then it was at that point he stopped and blessed it. So God had completed a task. And then at that point, he sat back and he enjoyed everything. But now ask yourself this, though. When have we ever said the work is done? It's all complete. I've got everything done. How often do we ever say that? Probably not often. If we really think like, oh, I got all my checklists done, probably the next thing we're going to do is start making another list, right? I mean, it was like, oh, I can't just stop. There's got to be another list. And really, the completion of a task normally leads to the next task. You get the kids off to school, well, they'll be home and they'll be wanting dinner, and same thing at work. I mean, you get the first next thing done, well, then that just leads to the next thing that has to be done. I think in my own life, we complete a Sunday morning worship service. Well, guess what? Monday morning or even Sunday afternoon, I'm thinking about the next Sunday, okay? So, I mean, there's that never-ending cycle. So God gives us Sabbath because if we don't stop until the job is done, well, we'll probably never stop. And we will, kind of like those slaves in Egypt, we will keep working until the day we die, which may come sooner if we never take any time to stop. So, next reason. Okay, and this is really the reason that God pushes Israel on this issue of Sabbath. It is to teach them to trust. And that, I said, was kind of the main thing that we're heading toward here today. Trust in Him and not in themselves. Back to that Deuteronomy passage. And he's talking about if you do not follow my commands, God says, you may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. So if you're not taking time for Sabbath, that's what gets into your head. But remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms His covenant. So when we take time for Sabbath, a day or half a day, half a day in there, you are saying that everything that I'm involved in is not going to collapse. Whatever it is, okay, it's going to be okay until I get back because God is doing the providing. I'll ask you, have you ever been involved in something so much that you thought that it couldn't survive without you? Maybe at work, volunteer organization. Gee, let's throw the church into that. I mean, we think that it can't make it, without me. Now, it might suffer greatly without you at all, but it's okay to stop at least a little bit from all of our stuff. I'll give you one example out of my own life. When I was in Caldwell, I was involved in a band parents organization, and I know that's a common thing. A lot of schools, people get involved in that. So it's all of the food stands at all the football games and the county fairs and the trips and the treasury, the uniforms and all of that stuff. It's a lot of work. And when I was there were about 4 or 5 of us that were really like kind of the core of that group. When I came back to Wayne County, I'll admit that was a hard thing for me to walk away from. Now, I had lunch with some old friends from Caldwell just this past week, And they were talking about the band parents, and they're still going. They didn't collapse without me. They made it, and really that whole core group, we've all moved on, and they are still going. I don't know how well they're doing, but at least that they haven't folded. So taking Sabbath, it is an act of trust that says it's going to be okay if I take a little bit of time away. God is calling me to take this time to just stop and to rest and to remember. And you remember what that is. Remembering is pulling the members back together, all the pieces back together that get torn apart by everything in life. Remembering is bringing it all back together again. God is saying that's important. And when we take that time for Sabbath, we are saying that is more important than me doing a little bit more work in whatever it is. And that is how Sabbath is an act of trust. I am trusting that God is going to provide. In fact, maybe God has already provided everything needed for me to just take a time to just step back. You see, I think part of what stops us from taking Sabbath is this feeling that there's not going to be enough. If I stop for just a little while, there's going to be some shortage of something somewhere. And so I can't do it. But in Sabbath, we are resisting that thinking. And we're trusting, hey, it's going to be okay. To emphasize this point further, God doesn't leave Sabbath as simply one day per week. We'll look at a passage in Leviticus chapter 25 here, and it says, now listen to this and think about what that means in that time. God says, for 6 years sow your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather your crops. But in the 7th year, the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest. So even the creation gets some Sabbath. And man, we could talk a lot about that, but we won't today. But do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Now, in those days, a bad harvest meant that people are going to really get hungry before the next harvest. I mean, even under normal circumstances, things would get tight between harvests. 2 bad harvests? Well, that meant that people are starving, and they're probably moving somewhere else to get the provision that they got to have to survive. So following this plan that God sets out here, man, that takes some real planning. That takes some discipline. That takes saving, and that takes a lot of trust. I mean, you are literally putting your life in God's hands. You're putting the lives of your family in the hands of God. And you're saying, God, I am trusting you to provide. Recently, we've looked at how can we build our faith? How do we increase our faith? And one of the key points was that we got to step out sometimes. Step out beyond what we normally do, and stretch ourselves to do something new that really requires God to show up in some way. We're trusting God. This passage that we're just looking at here, man, that would certainly qualify as trusting God. Now, we don't live in an agrarian culture today. Thank goodness. I mean, that we don't have the things that they deal with. We have international grain markets, though. I think, what would happen if everybody around the world took that year off? What would that do to inflation? But anyway, we won't. What will we pay for a price of bread with that? But anyway, we're not going down that road. But when it comes to taking Sabbath rest, it is still for us an act of faith. Taking Sabbath says, God is my provider. Not me, not all of my work. I'm trusting in God, not in myself. Taking Sabbath is a statement that says, my completeness, my wholeness, my value, my meaning is found in God, my provider, and not in me and everything that I'm doing. And if you do that, you're going to find that your love for God is going to grow. And also your desire to let other people know of the love, the mercy, the greatness, the provision of God. You're going to want to share that with other people. Now, I'm going to add this one last point in here and say that Satan does not want you to do the very things I'm talking about here. Yeah, that series on the full armor of God, that's coming in a couple of weeks. But I will say here that we have an enemy that wants to keep you busy, keep you misdirected and distracted, focusing on providing all of your provision for yourself, working for your dreams, your goals, fulfilling the expectations of everything out there in the world, which will then immobilize you from doing the mission that God is giving you to do. Satan may not be able to rob you of your faith, but Satan will be more than happy to simply immobilize you as an individual or us together as the church. If he can do that much, that's enough. He'll be happy with immobilizing you. Sabbath is a step that we can take to prevent that from happening. So how do we honor Sabbath? Well, golly, the ideas are endless, and we'll talk about that more here in our discussion. But obviously, worship, time for worship, that's important. Taking time to simply rest, yeah, we need that. But I think it's also okay to do something that you enjoy. Spend time with your family. Do something that you enjoy that maybe helps connect you with the Lord. One question that came up last week was, well, can I work in my garden, on the Sabbath? And here would be my thought. Don't think of it as work. Think of it as something that you enjoy, that gives you life, but also connects you with God. I mean, you're working with the plants, and God's providing. How easy can that turn into an act of worship? Lord, thank you for this sweet corn that's almost ready to harvest. That kind of thing. And working with that gives you joy, that gives you pleasure, but it also connects you with the Lord. In my book, I could say that's Sabbath if you're making that worship. Now, if it's just work for you, if you're just checking off a checklist, I would say, stop. Maybe you just need to sit back and just enjoy your garden and look at it, okay? And maybe that's what you need to do. But you can be creative, I think. But however it is, find ways to take Sabbath and allow God to renew you in that time. We'll talk about it more here in just a little bit. But our last hymn for this morning is, God